Hey guys, Io here with part 2 of the Raiding UI Essentials Workshop and Tutorial. In this video we're going to cover a RAID frame add-on called VuhDo. It should be noted that there are alternative add-ons for this purpose. In particular, Grid and Grid 2 are very popular. However, I tend to like VuhDo best for the combination of power and ease of setup. However, if you have issues or you want to try something different, particularly if you want another add-on with a slightly lower CPU footprint, I suggest taking what you see here and trying to apply it to one of those other add-ons. Now, to get started, you can download VuhDo, spelled VuhDo, from any of the major add-on websites, including Curse and WoW Interface. And once you install it and enable it and log into your character for the first time, you see a couple of extra menus on your screen here. Alright, this just shows that VuhDo is working, and we're going to move in and customize those now. To access the VuhDo customization window, you can type /VuhDo /opt in chat, or you can find the VuhDo icon on your minimap here and click it. Now within this menu, there are a couple of menu options here at the bottom in blue tabs, and then within each menu there are submenus shown by the white selectable tabs on the right. To get started, we're first going to go to the Move tab. Note that this VuhDo window is drag and droppable, so you can just move it up and out of the way while you customize your other RAID frame bars. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start completely from scratch. So by default, VuhDo gives you a couple of options here, but we're going to delete these three panels. You can do that by clicking the red X next to each panel to clear it, and then the red X again on an empty panel to delete it. So we'll do that for each of these three panels. And we'll get started by creating a new panel from scratch. We create the new panel by clicking Add New Panel from the VuhDo window. Now within a panel, to add groups within it, you can just click the green plus circle to the left of it, and it will put in a new group. You can customize these groups to whatever suits your playstyle. What we're going to do here is we're going to make each column equal to a RAID group. So under Type, we'll select Group, and then the first one will be Group 1. Then we're going to do that same process again, but we'll select Group and Group 2 and hit OK. And we're going to do this multiple times all the way out to 8 groups. The reason we're choosing 8 groups is because we're going to set this up so it will work for any raid from a 10-man to a 40-man. And because you can hold 5 members per group in a 40-man raid, you'll need at most 8 groups. Now, you can test how this would look in a 40-man raid by going up to the VuhDo panel and selecting the 40-man option here. You could also see what it would look like for 10 players, 25, or 5 by clicking any of these option buttons. Once you add your preferred preference selected, just click and hold Test, and it will give you an example of what that panel would look like in a raid. Note that it's completely random what it chooses, and each time you click it, the bars will change. Also note that while we have 8 groups, if we were in, say, a 10-man raid, this panel would still work, and the other groups 3 through 8 here would not take up space. They just won't be shown at all if they're empty. Now that we've got our basic group set up, we're going to customize some of the features within VuhDo. Note that whatever test option you have selected here, when you change the options panel below, it will automatically change this working panel to that preference so that you can kind of see what you're working with as you go. So for this, we're actually going to select 25-man, and now we'll switch to the General tab. And what you can see is VuhDo automatically applied a sample 25-man raid. Now, many of the options I'm going to show you will come down to personal preference, but the first thing that I like to do is in the General tab, uncheck in Fight under the Lock Panels frame. This will just be so that if you're in the middle of a fight and you need to move your RAID frames for any reason, you'll be able to. If instead you want them to be locked as you have your UI set up and just how you like it, and you don't want to accidentally drag and drop it, then you can re-enable that at any time. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to customize the sizing of the panels a little bit. So to do that, you can go to the Panels tab at the bottom, select it, and then go to Sizing, the second tab. Now within these options is a slider bar for each dimension, so you can change how wide or how high the bars are and the space between them. Once you have the proportions looking right, you can actually change and scale up or scale down the entire window all at once just using panel scale. So if I drag this up, it will be larger and down proportionally. So I'm going to leave mine at about 0.95 because that looks good for our purposes. And then I'm going to go back into the general submenu. Now within this menu, I like to uncheck Hue First. If that is checked, it will always show your character in the first row of the raid frame. Instead, I like to uncheck that, and I like to sort by tank, DD, then healer. What this will do is within that group, it will always show a tank at the top, the healer at the bottom, and DPS in the middle. And since I'll be healing and I want to prioritize who I'm placing my heals on, it's just easier for me to look at sometimes. Another common way to do this is to actually sort by max HP, with the assumption then that the people at the top of your list are going to need larger heals to bring them up a certain percentage, and the people towards the bottom, more likely clothies, are going to need smaller heals, but are also in greater danger of dying when they're on low health. Note also the two slider bars here, max columns and max rows. Because we're setting our raid frames up by groups, these aren't a big issue, but there are various settings you could use instead of groups. For example, you could have your first menu here show melee DPS, and then another one to show range DPS, a panel for just tanks or just healers. In that case, if you are in a 25-man group, you might have more than 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 range DPS in your group. In that case, you would want some overflow. So by selecting max rows, if a group had, say, 8 range DPS, after 5, it would create a new column with the same name and overflow them into that column. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the spells that are automatically bound within VuhDo. So when you click the spells panel here, you'll notice you have various spells particular to your class automatically assigned. What VuhDo does is when you click a nameplate within VuhDo, it will perform a predefined option. In this case, you can see VuhDo has automatically bound Flash Heal to the left mouse button and Greater Heal to my right mouse button. So if I left click my nameplate, it's going to automatically cast Flash Heal on it. If I right click it, it's automatically going to cast Greater Heal. While this is helpful, there are also drawbacks. The first thing I would do is change the left mouse button to target and hit enter. That'll change the left mouse button, so if you click a name in your raid frame, you'll target it by default. In general, this will be more useful to you than having another spell bound there. In addition, note that while you can bind other spells to things such as your mouse wheel, and keyboard keys, and global keys, I don't recommend doing this. These settings will actually conflict with the Blizzard key bindings, and you can run into problems. Additionally, while you can migrate all of your key bindings directly into VuhDo, so that's to say delete all of your key bindings and just manage them all through the add-on, that tends to make people reliant on the add-on itself for their play. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to put some basic mouse click items within VuhDo, but we're going to keep our key bindings managed through Bartender. In addition, any spells that you're interested in casting on mouse over, this is of particular importance to healers, as that's going to be their main job, is selecting other raid members to cast certain heals on, should perform this task using mouse over macros. When I hover my mouse over a nameplate in VuhDo, it is the same as putting my mouse over that character's actual avatar. So what that means is if you use a mouse over macro, so that's a macro for, say, Greater Heal, that says, when I cast this spell, this macro, it should be cast on whoever my mouse is over. When you're using a macro like that, you can actually select the person just by putting your mouse over their VuhDo nameplate. The benefit of doing this instead of managing the spells through VuhDo itself is that if it's a patch day, if VuhDo itself isn't updated, or any of those other things that comes along that wipes out your add-ons, your key bindings will still be stored within your Blizzard settings, and you can use this healing approach or spellcasting approach with the Blizzard default raid frames. Now, by default, the Blizzard raid frames are pretty clunky, don't work well, aren't as interactive as one might like to show certain critical information, but they can still be used so your healing won't be crippled. However, with that in mind, I do recommend binding a couple of key spells into the mouse buttons on VuhDo. Alright, so first, make sure that under No Modifier, the left mouse button is for target. Right. In addition, on the right button, you can put anything that's convenient for your class. I know a lot of healers that for the right button choose a quick heal to be just in case, or something like a dispel. If you are a hunter, you might want to put misdirection in this slot instead. So instead of choosing a target and casting misdirect on it, you could actually cast misdirection just by right-clicking that player's icon in your raid frame. This can also be especially helpful for tanks, such as paladins, who might routinely want to cast a Hand of Protection or Salvation on another player and need to do it quickly. Note that you can also use modifiers with these key bindings. So if I were to change this option button to Shift, these spells here would be cast if I were to perform the same action while holding the Shift key. So note that if I were to hold Shift and click my left mouse button over someone's name, nothing would happen because nothing's assigned to that binding. However, if I were to hold Shift and right-click a name, Dispel Magic would automatically be cast on whoever I clicked. With that in mind, please take a moment and keybind some of the spells that you think you might want to cast on other players within your raid to appropriate mouse keys. And again, make sure not to change any bindings for your actual keyboard. Once you've done this, we're going to move into the Buffs panel. The Buffs panel here manages this extra frame that we have up top that might be hidden in a corner of your screen called the VuhDo Buff Watch. Now, not everyone likes to use this, so if you want to disable it, you can just click the General submenu and uncheck Enable and it will disappear. However, if you do choose to use it, what you can do is in the Configuration menu, just select any spell that you might want to be watched for your character. In general, this is going to be buffs that you want to keep up on you. So I'm going to select Inner Focus and, let's see, Power Word Fortitude here, just for an example. So what you can see is if I do not have a buff on, so let's turn off my Inner Fire, alright, this ad's going to tell me, hey, you don't have one of these basic buffs on. Or if you do, it'll tell you, hey, you have Fortitude on and this is how much time you have left. The other thing you can do with this is if you don't have something on, you can just click it and it will automatically cast whatever that buff is missing. Note that depending on your class, the options that you'll be able to track will vary. Also, many things, such as in my case, Inner Fire is a stance, so if there will be an option menu, so I can select that. So say I'm using Inner Will instead, I can choose to have it track that. Now that we've customized our raid groups, our buff watch, and our automatic spells, you've completed a lot of the setup required to use VuhDo. There are a ton of options within this add-on, but most of those are to fine-tune or tweak little things. Right now, VuhDo will work just fine. That being said, there's going to be a lot of functions that it will automatically perform for you, so we're going to go over some of those real quick. The first thing we're going to do is go into this Colors panel here. And again, when you do this, VuhDo is automatically going to give you a sample raid group. This is of particular importance to healers, but you'll notice that when a raid member is affected with a debuff, their icon, or their panel rather, is going to show up with a particular color. So you can see Worst Queen, in this example here, is affected by a poison debuff. This is important for healers because there are various raid mechanics that will have debuffs, such as a magic debuff that will need to be dispelled right away, or some random wiping thing of death will happen. If you are a healer that uses a default frames, this can be difficult. You have to look to DBM, find out who's targeted, or that person has to call it out, and you and another healer might have to coordinate who's going to dispel which debuff. VuhDo clearly makes this much simpler. So in this example here, I could see if this poison debuff was going to kill a raid member very, very quickly, I now can see that clearly that someone in Group 5 needs to be dispelled very quickly. I could just mouse over, and if you remember, I had my Shift right-click set to dispel, so I could just Shift right-click, and that would be all said and done. In addition, you'll notice that several players are faded out on the meter. If a player is faded out, that means they are out of range of your most basic spells. Now, this range is set automatically by VuhDo and should be appropriate for your class. If you hover your mouse over them, it's not going to do it now because these are just sample raid frames, but if this was an actual raid with an actual raid member, when someone's out of range, you you could hover over their name and an arrow would appear, pointing you in the direction of that player. This is especially helpful for healers and on fights such as Elegon, when everyone's running in various directions and someone might need to heal critically, but you don't necessarily know where to find them. Feel free to play with the rest of the options in this menu if you like. Most of them just have to deal with changing the colors and how your frames look in different situations. In particular, what you should pay attention to, especially if you're a healer, is this HOTS and HOTS number 2 menu. What this will do is when you cast a certain HOT on a player, an icon's going to show up above their name. That icon will have a shape and a color as defined here. So if I briefly close out of VuhDo here, you'll see that I'm the only one in the group here. But if I cast a renew, again, just by hitting my my keyboard, key binding number 1, while I'm hovered over my name, you'll see it casts a renew, and I can see the countdown and a red icon for that. You'll see this purple icon also appeared because since I'm a holy priest, I have the Echo of Light Mastery. So that appears to show me that there's an extra weaker HOT showing. Even things like Prayer of Mending will work for this, as if I cast it on myself, you'll see an icon to represent it will show up here, and it even shows a number of charges left on it. Now, if you want to customize the way any HOTs look within your frames, you can do that very easily by opening up the VuhDo window and going back to the Panels tab here. Okay? Now, within the Panels tab, you'll see HOT icons and HOT bars. And these options look really complicated, but actually they're not. What this here is showing is a standard placement of certain positions on the bar. So if you look at my example here with my name, you can see number 1 right here is assigned to Renew, and it's just my own. So what that means is when I cast my Renew on a player, if it's active, it's going to show up in slot 1, which is here, and only my own will show up. If I just wanted to know, say, any Renew is on that player, I could check this, and any time a Renew from any priest was rolling on that player, it would show up here in this slot. And selecting between these two would just change the standard placement of icons within the frame. Now you'll notice there are various spells within different slots that will show up if I, or in some cases, other priests cast them on that player. In addition, while they're learning, some players find it helpful to actually change the icons. By default, they're glossy, which is that nice clean color that we changed or saw where we could change in the Colors tab. But a lot of people like to just change it to icons. What that will do is if I cast Renew on myself now, you see it just shows a small Renew icon and the small Echo of Light Mastery. And if I cast a Prayer of Mending, it just shows a miniaturized version of the icon instead. Note also that a particularly helpful aspect of VuhDo is this AoE advice here in slot 7. What VuhDo does is it will calculate an optimal place to put certain AoE healing casts. Now, that's dependent on how the heal works. Most people aren't necessarily aware of this, but if you take a Holy Priest, for example, I have here my Prayer of Healing, which is going to throw out a powerful AoE heal on a couple of party members. But the party members it actually heals are all the members within the same group in range of the person that it was originally cast on. That's different from, say, Circle of Healing, which when you target a person, the AoE heal is going to go to every player that's physically near that player that it's cast on. Now, while you can and should be paying attention to the placement of your raid, this little AoE advice can actually help in a pinch when there's a lot of movement or you're learning a new fight and you're not necessarily tracking in your head where everyone else in your raid is standing. Now, the last thing I'm going to do within this HOT menu is show you how to change a HOT icon into a HOT bar. This can be helpful for some classes that need to refresh their HOTs or have another spell that will do it automatically, or they want to cast something based on how long that HOT has left. The numbers can be kind of hard to read, so we're going to make this a little easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my Renew, which is in slot 1, from that slot into a HOT bar. So I'm actually going to click this and I'm going to empty it out. So now there's no more Renew HOT. If I cast Renew on myself, that icon no longer shows up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into HOT bars and put it into bar position 1. Now mind you, these are the positionings of the available HOT bars. There are 3, and then these are what are actually assigned to the bars. So I'm going to keep this standard top, bottom, middle layout, and I'm going to assign my Renew to slot 1, and just my own. I don't care if others are renewing in this case. And what that will do is now when I cast Renew on myself, you can see a shaded green bar that's going to tick down to 0. when it will expire. And again, if I wanted to change the coloring, I could do that through the Colors menu. All right. Now, if we switch back to the Move panel and give an example of a 25-man raid again, all right, you can see various things going on within this panel, and you can start to understand the power of why an add-on like VuhDo is so important, particularly for healers. So I could see right now, Elite Runner in Group 1 is very low on health, and I could just go to him and shift right-click if I, say, had Flash Heal or Greater Heal bound there, and I can just move around and heal much, much faster than a traditional click the target, find the spell, click the spell, or even click to target and then hit my keybind. It's just much, much easier. In addition, this add-on shows you a lot of additional information. So you'll notice that some bars are highlighted in red. Those are players that have drawn aggro. So it's very easy to see which players have aggro and are about to take damage from something. In addition, if you were, say, a tank who could Hand of Salvation the aggro off of a player, then it becomes just a matter of right-clicking that name if you have Salvation bound to right-click, or again, if you're using macros to use whatever the key binding is. The last thing I'm going to show you here is how to save something to a profile. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Tools. All right. Within Tools, when you have a profile, you're allowed to enter a name and save it. You can also automatically enter it due to a group size. This becomes helpful when you're moving between different raid sizes. So let's say that this is fine for 10 and even 25-man content, but if I were in a 40-man raid, these panels just might be too big. I don't want them to take up that much space. I could go back to my sizing, I could make them smaller, and I could save this as, say, 40-man raid, and check this activate due to 40 group size only. And that means when you enter a 40-man raid group, it will automatically shift to that profile and shrink down your panels to the appropriate size. For now, we're going to just call this General Rating. We're going to activate it. We have to save it first. And we'll activate it due to 10, 15, 25, and heck, even 1 and 5. It'll be our all-purpose. Alright? And we'll hit OK. So now this is our raid frame, and it will always be active. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is, very quickly, I'm going to go through and make an alternative profile just for 5-man dungeons. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up VuhDo. Go to General, or Buffs here. I'm going to turn off this Buff Watch, because I don't really particularly care for it. And now I'm going to change this into a setup, and switch my panels around, so that it just looks better for 5-man. And again, you could use those, but this is just for demonstration. So I'm going to clear this through, and instead, I'm going to change my type to Special. And you'll see you have a whole bunch of different options here. Now, if you're a Hunter, a Warlock, or a Pet class, you can also make a bar that's interactive just like this, specifically for your pets. And you could do that with a type Special, value Pets. What I'm actually going to do is I'm making a 5-man here, so I'm going to change this to Melee Tank. I'm going to make another group, again, Special, for Melee DPS, one for Range DPS, one for my healers, and one for other players' pets. Alright. So now this is a little bit different from the groups we had set up before, but if we select 5-man and test this, we can see that the frame will generally look like this, and that last column may even be missing if there's no players with pets. But I'll always know that my tank is going to be in the first column, melee, who are going to be stacked up with the tank, so might be good for AoE heals that are based on positioning, will be in that second column, and the ranged and healer, who may be spread out, are going to be in the last, or the middle 2 columns. Now if I wanted to go through and save this profile, I could just go to Tools, I'll rename it to 5-man example, I'll save it, and I'll activate it just due to group size 5. And what that means now is if I'm in a group up to or with 5 people, it will switch to that profile. If I am in a 10 or 25-man raid group and 10 and 25 were selected on the other one, it will switch me to that one. And then I could even make a smaller profile for 40, so you can see how it would easily interchange between different profiles depending on your raid size or role. One last thing that I will mention with VuhDo is that when you log into a different character, it won't automatically import the settings. It will ask you if you want to overwrite, append, or copy the profiles. That's because you could customize VuhDo per each character. I don't advise that you do that. It can get very cluttered and messy. Instead, when that comes up, click Overwrite, but note that the spells that you assign will not be saved, so you'll still have to change those on a character-by-character basis. Now the last part of this guide is to show you how VuhDo actually works in action and why it can be so important, especially to healers. I'm going to include just a roughly 30-second video of myself healing in an LFR using the VuhDo frames and mouse over macros. Note that if you don't know how to make a mouse over macro, there is a very easy text-based guide on the ER forum website that you can check out there that will teach you anything you need to know about writing those macros. Alright, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Thanks, guys. As you can see, we're a little bit towards the end of the Stone Guard encounter here, but you can see my raid frames are pretty central. They're easy to see, while also not blocking my view. I can heal just by mousing over and casting my spells within the frames. It's also very, very easy to see who's affected by the Rooting Ice magic debuff, and to dispel them just by hitting my key binding while hovering over their name. In addition, you can also see that it's very, very clear which players are in the same group, and the AoE advice was coming up. So I can see that if I want to heal everyone in group 2, a Prayer of Healing is going to be the better choice, versus if you have a lot of people stacked up in the same area. VuhDo was, as it was just there a moment ago, advising me that a Circle of Healing would be good to cast on this player. I hope this guide's been helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, again, leave them below, and enjoy. I hope this guide helps you guys significantly.